It's a pleasure to be here. And what I've noticed about the Compassion Research Days is that we researchers get a lot of time to share with you, but actually most of the work is done by Facebook engineers who tend to be very humble and stay in the background. So thanks for all the work that you've done. So I'll just put up my first slide. I don't mean to be sensationalist with this first slide, but a study that came out this year showed that the urge to check our social media and Facebook is stronger than the urge for sex and addictive substances like cigarettes. So you might, think for yourself whether you've been at an event that you were really enjoying, or perhaps with people you really love, and all of a sudden you get that itch to, oh my gosh, what if I got an email, or what if I got some kind of notification? So if this happens to you, that's quite normal, but we can think about, why does this happen? Why is it that this urge is so strong? Well, what research shows is that our desire for social connection is one of our strongest needs. And it's also a very significant predictor of health, psychological health, physical health, recovery from disease, and even longevity, even the length of our life. So it has this enormous repercussions for us. And from the time that we were born until very old age, social connection is probably the most important need that we have in life after basic needs like food and shelter. In fact, we ran a study asking 600 people, what is it that brings you the greatest sense of fulfillment in your life? And the answer that was most commonly given was to be with loved ones, to connect with loved ones, and to be of service in some way. So on a gut feeling, gut level, we know this to be true, even though the world out there tells us, buy this object and you will be fulfilled, achieve this professional success or award or whatever it is. We have these beliefs, but when we really think about it, social connection is at the core of what we need. We also asked, if you only had 3 days to live, what would you do? And this time, the overwhelming response was, again, social connection and that need, that desire to be with others. So as much literature as exists about the impact of social connection on our health and well-being, there's also as much literature on the impacts of low social connection and loneliness, and the impacts of that. In fact, you may or may not know this, but if you feel low social connection, if you feel a lot of loneliness, it's worse for you than smoking, obesity, and high blood pressure. That's quite a fact, because we often think, we're going to go to the gym and eat properly and do all the right things, but that sense of connection from within is a greater predictor of our well-being. And as Arturo was saying, I'm going to be talking a little bit about our work with veterans, and the veteran community in particular can feel a great sense of isolation when returning or transitioning out of military life. But why do people join the military in the first place? Well, sometimes, for many who I've spoken to, it is that sense of brotherhood, that sense of connection, that desire to be part of something larger with a purpose. And as Pierre Carlo was saying, some kind of meaning in life, a greater reason to get up every day and be of service, and make a difference. So these are some images that you see here. And this tattoo, I wanted to put this tattoo up because of so many veterans that I've worked with have tattooed the names of the brothers that they lost in combat. And they actually call each other brother. If you hear them talking, that's how they talk to their friend. They say brother. So it's this very powerful sense of connection. And joining the military is, in a way, this way of joining a family, joining a community for a greater good. And many say that the relationships that happen on a battlefield or in a difficult combat situation, that relationship of I'm there to help protect my brother next to me or my sister next to me, that connection is stronger than even a marital bond or a familial bond. It's really that connection that happens in the face of life and death. It's so powerful. And for many veterans who return, they're constantly seeking that. And they don't have that. And many of them come back and they're completely separated from everyone they were with. They're, everyone who was in their squad or their battalion probably lives all over the country. And all of a sudden they're back and they're in a civilian world, and it's a huge transition for many reasons that I'll go into now. So when war comes home, we see these really beautiful and touching images of families reuniting and that have been apart for so long, and fathers and mothers, well, fathers in particular, meeting maybe their child for the first time, and we've maybe all seen those YouTube videos that are very moving about the coming home, but oftentimes those are followed by new battles that I'll go into now. One of the biggest ones being combat trauma, which you have probably all a little bit familiar with through the press, but having gone through a very difficult life and death situation, you can come back with what's been called PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which is now being called PTS, because it's not really a disorder, it's a really normal reaction to having been in a situation that is so highly stressful. And oftentimes the PTSD is accompanied by really high anxiety to the point of not being able to sleep, having flashbacks, nightmares, and having emotional numbness, a feeling of not being able to connect. So again, we were talking about the importance of connection, but the internal sense of no longer being able to connect because those negative emotions were shut off in that really difficult traumatic situation, and so as a consequence, even positive emotions can't be felt anymore. So people come back and they have all sorts of issues, such as and there's also this giant disconnect from civilian culture, because imagine you get up every day and you're living a life of service, of greater meaning, there's a purpose to your life, and then you come back in the civilian world, and many of us civilians do get up and have a sense of service and want to make a difference, but also it's not as much of a part of the civilian life. There is a certain amount, a degree of everyone for himself, and everyone needs to, I got to go and do my job and live my life, and there's more of a sense of my, whereas in the military I would say there's a sense of we. It's always we. It's always others before self. It's always a community. It's always a group. It's coming back into civilian life and being struck by that shift. And I have a friend who works at the VA, and she said, I was working with a group there, a PTSD group, and for 1 hour we discussed the fact that civilian life is more, that there's more of a self-interested, perhaps not self-interested, but it's that civilians don't all have a service orientation. And she was saying it was so interesting because we spent an hour talking about this, and it was like a revelation for some of these veterans, some of which are Vietnam veterans. So they've been around for a long time, and they still don't get that idea of self-interest. That's actually very beautiful, but you can see the shift, right, between, for someone coming out of that kind of a view of life and that transition. So combat trauma, I spoke about, can be very debilitating. It can come from a number of things. From combat trauma to abuse that can come in all forms, and that can also happen within a military context. You may have also read about in the press. So what comes from there is often marital and relationship issues because of a disconnect with your spouse. For the reasons I mentioned, social isolation is huge, and that's a really big problem, especially when in the face of PTSD. A number of veterans that I work with, they said, I just bunkered up in my basement. That's where they are. They're in their basement, so they're not going to be connecting much, And or there's a sense of, well, I'm really anxious, so I don't want to go to the mall, and I don't want to step outside. And even being in a room like this with so many people, it can be very uncomfortable. Substance abuse. So I'll go into this in a little bit more detail, but substance abuse is very frequent, oftentimes as a way of self-medicating. Insomnia that I talked about, anxiety, which again can interfere with all parts of life from professional to personal. Depression, rage and violence is one that often comes out in close others, which is really unfortunate, but it's also a symptom of PTSD. And one veteran once said, they turned me into a killing machine and they never turned me off. So that transition back into civilian world, and he said, he was telling me, gosh, I was in this bar and I saw this guy and he was beating up his girlfriend, and next thing I knew, I punched him, there was blood, and I didn't realize what I had done. So just that immediate kind of reaction to protect, yes, but also in a way that's inappropriate for the situation. Problems with concentration, attention, and then suicide. So this one is probably the biggest problem, which we don't hear about enough, actually. There are more than 22 suicides, veteran suicides a day in the USA. If there was an epidemic in the USA right now where 22 people were dying a day, you bet we would be paying attention. So this is a really big problem, and one of the reasons why it's so wonderful that Arturo wanted to place an emphasis on doing something for veterans on Facebook, because I think anything that we can do, if it can benefit even a few people, that would be fantastic. So I'll just share with you a quote now from one of the veterans who was in my study I conducted that I'll share with you after this, just describing what PTSD is like. A few weeks ago, shooting, cars exploding, screaming death, that was your world. Now back home, no one knows what it's like over there, so no one knows how to help you get back to your normalcy. They label you a victim of the war. I am not a victim. But how do I get back my normalcy? For most of us, it's booze and Ambien. It works for a brief period, then it takes over your life. He told me I could put his name up here and share this with you. So this is all too common. So what are some of the common treatments for PTSD out there? There are medication, anti-anxiety medications, a number of different pharmaceuticals, as well as therapy, which often involves exposure therapy, so going over the trauma that you experienced, which can be really challenging. And there's a high dropout rate, even for veterans who go through an entire course of treatment. Their outcomes are not always successful, and there's a large number of veterans who just don't want to even participate in taking drugs or in therapy because they're very self-sufficient. They're the most independent people. That's why they went in and did the things that they did, because they are so strong. They are not willing to look at themselves as a victim. And I think the quote by Nate is so telling. I am not a victim. Many civilians, most of us, we kind of like being victims sometimes. Like, I have a flu, take care of me. That's just not, they're like, I have PTSD, which is seriously disruptive, and they're still not willing to see themselves as a victim. So every veteran I've met has amazed me that way, just that willingness to just want to take responsibility all the time, even if it's for themselves. So given that many of these treatments don't work, we conducted a study that I'll go over very briefly when I was at the University of Wisconsin to look at whether complementary and alternative treatments might work. And in particular, we looked at a workshop that's offered by a nonprofit called Project Welcome Home Troops, and it's a breathing-based meditation intervention. And I'll just describe it briefly. And this is actually actual pictures from the study, because there was a film that was made during the study, so we got some footage. But the veterans came in, they were all from the wars of Iraq or Afghanistan, and participated in this breathing workshop, which, at first they thought, gosh, what's this hippy-dippy, stuff. But by the end of the workshop, they really, really liked it. And in fact, this veteran that you see here has a t-shirt that says Godfather of Beer. He actually went on to become an instructor, is now teaching veterans in Wisconsin. But the results that we had, just to throw in a little bit of, just to show the impact that a complementary and alternative treatment might have, that is we saw decreases in PTSD that persisted 1 month and 1 year after the 1 week intervention, just showing the impact that it can have. And this was in terms of self-reported questionnaires of PTSD. And what we did was we correlated that with changes in psychophysiology. So one thing we know about PTSD is that there's a very high startle response. So a little noise that you might not even notice could send someone into an anxiety attack. And so we wanted to measure startle reactivity, which we measure by placing electrodes around the eyes and playing really loud sounds, white noise bursts in an earphone. Not pleasant, but for someone without PTSD, it wouldn't really impact you that much, but for them, it really did have an impact. So what we looked at was like, well, is there a change in psychophysiological startle? How does it match up to self-reported decreases in PTSD? And we saw a very strong correlation for those of you who like stats. It was a 0.9, and really showed that as much as they said that it helped, that they had been helped, that their PTSD symptoms decreased, that's also what we saw in their psychophysiology. So this much to tell you, I'll go over some quick testimonials, and the reason I'm sharing this research is to show what one little nonprofit is out there doing and the impact it's having, and then how that connects back to Facebook. So see, these are some of the testimonials. Nate, again, I already read you the first part of his quote, but the very last sentence was, until this study, I could not find right help for me, breathing like a champ. So, and then another study, another participant, I feel like I was dead since I came back from Iraq. I feel like I'm alive again. This is Rich Lowe, and he is now at GE, and he's bringing this program into GE, which has a very large veterans network. And finally, Travis, who's the one who became an instructor. Thank you for giving me my life back. That's probably the most powerful words that you can hear. So the question is, how do veterans find out about nonprofits like Project Welcome Home Troops, right? They go to the VA, they get the drugs, they get the therapy, but how do they find out about other resources that are out there that can really help them? And this is where Facebook comes in, right? So this is the Project Welcome Home Troops Facebook page. And today, I have a very special guest who came with me and said she would be, and I told her about this yesterday, and she rearranged her schedule to be here. And she's a veteran who clicked on this page, and she's going to share with you a little bit of her story. So please welcome Hannah McBride. Yeah.
Hi. I'm Hannah. I just want to share a little bit about me. I had PTSD for over 10 years from the military, and nothing seemed to work. All the traditional methods didn't help me, but a Facebook page did. Yes. I'm part of several veterans groups on Facebook, and one of them had shared a post from this page, Project Welcome Home Troops, about a meditation class being offered in Palo Alto by Emma. And so I clicked on the page and thought about it and looked at it and figured, what the hell, because nothing else seemed to work. And I messaged that page, and they connected me with Emma. And then I did a meditation workshop and several others. And now I'm working to become a teacher. Yes. So I just want to share a little bit the Facebook veterans resources and the app help. Like, they literally save veterans' lives. Just a little click of the button gave me my life back. That's it.
Thanks so much, Hannah, for coming. And yes, after I completed the study, I became an instructor of this program because I saw how much it was impacting. The veterans in my study are all I'm still friends with, and they would say, for me, a study can have an impact over years, but there's nothing like teaching someone directly and having the honor of meeting Hannah and learning so much from her. So thank you, Hannah. So and I'll show you a couple other Facebook pages that are making a really big difference. This is the Mission Continues that was started by a veteran. And one thing that veterans really miss when they come out of the service is service. It's such an important part of their life. It, again, gives a greater sense of meaning and purpose. And what Mission Continues does is it has service projects and helps veterans get back into doing community service. So they go and do projects around the US and around the world. This is another organization, Dry Hooch. It was started by 2 Vietnam veterans who were homeless at the time, and one of them had been well, the story is really beautiful. One of them he developed PTSD when the Iraq War started. He didn't know he had PTSD. He was a Vietnam veteran. He didn't have symptoms until then. So he develops PTSD. He starts thinking he's going crazy. He starts drinking. He loses his job. Finally, he loses his home. All he has is his car. He drunk drives. He hits someone and kills them. And he ends up in jail. And he thinks, my life cannot get any worse than this. I mean, this is just terrible. And VA psychiatrists and other veterans recognized that he had PTSD, and they fought to get him out. And he was the first veteran to be acquitted innocent on account of temporary insanity due to PTSD. So he came out and he thought, well, what do I do now? The only thing I can do is help other veterans. So he and his other veteran friend, who was his AA mentor, started Dry Hooch together, which at first was just a little bus that served coffee. And the whole idea was to create a community for veterans by veterans. That's an alternative to the VA and mental health clinics. And now Dry Hooches are popping up all over the US, and they're an incredible organization. So again, Dry Hooch, another organization and when you meet Mark Flower and Bob Curry, who created Dry Hooch, they're surrounded by all these young veterans who literally they're like fathers to so many of the younger veterans that are coming to them. And another page that I'll share with you is awesome blank, my drill sergeant said. Why am I sharing this page? Well, it's a military humor page, which is really, military humor is its very own, has its very own flavor. and is something that is mostly understood by members of the military. And there are a number of pages that really draw together a large community. Now, that's all great. But what happened on this page, and I shared this with at the last Facebook Compassion meeting, was that one day, one of the managers of this page gets a message that says, I have a friend, he's suicidal, he has a gun, he's in Baltimore, we don't know where he is, and his phone is off. And so he posts, he said all jokes are off, and he posted something on the page saying, we need to help this guy, can anyone help? And over that night, and he posted it I think around 10 or 11 p.m., throughout that whole night, there were hundreds and hundreds of comments that came in. People got in their cars and started driving toward Baltimore from other states. And by 4:30 a.m., this man was saved. And his voicemail was recorded and actually put on a website. And if you listen to that voicemail, it's so moving. So just to show you the impact that, a connection on Facebook can have. And if you think about those veterans that are in their basement because they're bunkered up, or that are really socially isolated, or so anxious that they can't leave their home, what do they have? They have the internet. So what was our goal? When Jake and Tessa and Arturo invited me in, we thought together, and our goal was, could we create a Facebook platform that connects veterans with existing Facebook resources to kind of bring it all together? So how did we want to do this? We wanted to compile and vet the most useful resources that exist on Facebook and place them all on one go-to page, go-to app. So that was our goal. And this is what we did. We consulted with veterans on page content, so the most useful pages out there. And we selected and vetted the most useful ones, and we wanted to stay out of controversial ones, such as political, or we also wanted to avoid link farms, which are a lot of the military pages. If you go to them, they'll be like, oh, here are a bunch of resources, and then there's about 100 links that you don't want to click on. They're literally URLs sometimes. So we wanted to make it easy, just put the best, and just in a format that was easily accessible. And then we put that out, received some feedback from veterans, did some tweaking of it, and posted it live. So I'll show you that now. A little bit of, actually, you know what? Wait, hold on. I'll start with we'll go to it after. So this is kind of how it looks, and put the address there so that you can check it out. You can also go to facebookforveterans.com. That's actually a direct link. And what we did is we took the existing pages and we binned them into 3 categories that made a lot of sense, which was the well-being and resilience category, education and employment, and community. And should we load it up so I can show real quick? Oh, thank you. Okay, great. So can I scroll? Oh, okay. Oh, let's scroll up. Okay. So all the resources you need in one place. Welcome to Veterans Resources. These are the 3 categories. And what do we put in the categories? We put a combination of existing governmental organizational resources and nonprofits that seem to be doing a lot for the community and had a substantial enough following, but also that we heard were helpful and that we vetted. And so here, for example, is the Wellbeing and Resilience page, which has Project Welcome Home Troops, Veterans PTSD Project. So these are 3 nonprofits. And then if you click, it has, we also have the Veterans Health Administration, which, for example, is a governmental institution. National Veterans Foundation is a nonprofit run for veterans by veterans. And then the Education and Employment, again, has some nonprofits like Veteran Green Jobs, Farmer Veteran Coalition. So these are nonprofits that veterans may or may not find on their own, and a number of other organizations there. And finally, the community ones. So these have, again, U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs is more of a governmental one. Blue Star Families is more of a communities nonprofit. And then, Marines, Department of Defense, those are obvious governmental organizations. So that is what our, thank you. That's what the page looks like. So we posted it live, and we also asked for feedback. So we wanted to see, we ourselves looked a little bit at who's using this, and what do they look like, what are they doing, and we also wanted to see if they had some feedback for us. And first of all, what we found is that it was equally being used by men and women, about 50%. And we don't know if all the visitors are veterans or family members. It was mostly younger, people under 35 mostly, so a lot of younger people looking at the app. But one question we had is, okay, were visitors more drawn to the nonprofits, the ones that are kind of offering novel services, or to the more governmental organizations? And did they get connected to the new resources they may not have known before? And actually, this is what we found. So the NGO bar is on your left, and the GO bar is on the right, the governmental organization versus non-governmental. And so the most clicked pages are those that people would be most likely to discover through the app, which was kind of a cool finding that we have. And we're still exploring, we're still working on it, but these are some of the future directions, some of the things that we want to think about and expand upon. Are people liking the pages that they're visiting? In what way are they benefiting from these new connections? Are they coming back to the app? So what are some of the benefits that they're getting? How are they engaging? Are they sharing this with others? And then we also want to think about ways to create more community. So right now it's really a page that gives you information. Is there a way that we can create more of a community, maybe get live feedback, user input? One veteran suggested, hey, why don't you do something that's got a local feel too? So like, let's say you're in Michigan, that you have more Michigan kind of organizations that are displayed. And then also what we've been asked for is the family support. So a lot of family members come back, and the veterans situation is one, but then what about the family who doesn't know how to cope with everything that's going on? So I'll just end with, this is an article that I read the other day about a Facebook veterans group it's a Facebook group, and it's helping veterans. Veterans are getting a certain amount of help from their therapeutic or medical help, but they're also developing these, self-organizing these Facebook groups where there's a lot of support that's being had. And just given what I've shared earlier about how specific military culture is and how it's really its own culture, there's something about veterans joining up with other veterans in kind of a support fashion. So that's something we also want to look into moving forward. So again, here is the link to the page. And thank you so much to Tessa and Jake and Artur and everyone who has been working so hard on this. So.
Questions? Can we get a mic?
Any gender breakdown in that? Have you actually studied how women soldiers and men soldiers might differently react to this kind of situations? Actually, I was very glad to see a woman soldier here today.
Yeah. What kind of situations do you mean to the app or to a trauma?
To the trauma, actually.
Yeah. So I don't know about differences in gender. I would say that men and women sometimes have different kinds of traumatic experiences. But what's really interesting about who develops trauma and who doesn't is that oftentimes childhood experiences determine whether you'll develop PTSD. So people who have had a childhood where there was very little family support or there was already abuse as a child are more likely to develop it. But those who had a very strong family, and also people who have a very strong spiritual or religious life, tend to have tend to develop PTSD less in the face of the same trauma. So certain things seem to be protective, while others might lead to greater vulnerability. Yeah.
Oh, that's Mark. Since your page promotes NGOs versus GOs,
That's both.
It's both?
Yeah.
But most of the people who go there know about the GOs already because when they get out processed. So it's not really surprising that they discover the NGOs through your page.
Absolutely right.
That was your intent, right?
Well, our intent is for them to find whatever resources are out there. So if they don't know about them.
I mean, the ones they don't know about,
Yeah.
particularly.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I'm just trying to understand if there's
Yeah,
any
no, that's
extra
definitely a good
significance
point.
to that. Okay.
Absolutely, for sure. And that in a way that is our, we are hoping, I mean, it's much easier to go on and put in Marine Corps and be like, oh, here's the Marine Corps page, but not necessarily, oh, veterans for farmers for veterans, or I didn't know about that, so absolutely. The goal is to have all the veterans that are useful, all the resources that are useful, and then, but obviously the NGOs are the ones that are going to be most unknown. Thanks.
Okay. Well, I think, one more, and then.
I think this is really interesting work, and what I was wondering about is how do you market it? So how do you get it out there, and how are you measuring what are successful ways to get it out there so that there's a huge uptake and then hopefully an impact?
Thank you for asking that. Absolutely, and I think that's what we're working on now. It's really that question of, okay, now how do we get it out there? Because the veteran feedback we've received is that they really like it, they find it useful, but it's a question of how to get it out there more. So that's stay posted for next Facebook Compassion Day.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll have one more 10-minute break, and then we'll come back with actual live teenagers. For that part, I'm actually going to ask everybody to get closer, but so think about that when you come back. But see you guys in 10 minutes at 5 o'clock.